In this video, we're going to learn how to work with Ajax using the Fetch API, which is a newer way that's built into JavaScript now. It's a newer way to work with Ajax. And it is the preferred way and probably more the industry standard way now, rather than using the older XML HTTP request object. It's a little simpler. I prefer this way. It's easy to read. To me, it's easy to read. So let's talk about it. So the Fetch API that's built into JavaScript has a method called fetch, and we can give it a URL. Okay, so that makes the GET request to the specified URL that we're trying to reach. Okay, and it returns something called a promise object. And basically, the promise object is an object that will eventually return a response. So I always think of promise. I like to think of promise objects when I hear them. They can be a little confusing. In the fact that we talk about them, it's really what's happening behind the scenes, but I always think about it as an IOU. Hey, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. If any of you know what I'm talking about there, you might find that funny. It's an old Popeye thing. So anyway, it returns this promise object that eventually will return the response. So it immediately says, here you go. Hold this promise. I promise you I'll give you a response as soon as I get it, basically. And we'll see how to use that in a second. If it's confusing, wait till you see the code and you won't be so confused anymore. Okay. There's another method called then. And after then, we can put in a callback function. We can either write a callback function right inside the parentheses, like an anonymous function, or we can put a function, a separate function, and call it if we want to. So this registers the callback function to execute once the promise is resolved. Once that promise object that we got back finally resolves itself and says, here's the data I promised you, then we're going to run some code that's in here, and that could be just calling another function somewhere. So the callback function receives a single parameter, which is the eventual return value of the request. It's the data that comes back from the server. Okay. So this then also returns a promise object. Okay. And we'll see what happens with that in a second. Okay. There's also a catch method. Okay. So this is like what happens if the promise works. If we actually get some good data back, this is what runs. The catch is what runs. It's another function we can define to run if we don't get the data back that we expect. If the promise is rejected or there's something wrong with it, it will run whatever code we put in the callback function in the catch section. Okay. And then lastly, we have a method called JSON, which also returns a promise object, but eventually resolved to a JavaScript object created from the JSON that comes back from the request. So these four methods, what do they look like when we put them together? We can chain them one after another, and it's actually pretty easy to read. So it looks like this. This is the same site we looked at in the last videos, jasonplaceholder.typico.com/users. Same data gets sent back to us, but this is the code that we're running for this. So we just say fetch, and we give it the address that we want to fetch. And then we put .then, okay? So then when we get the response, okay, we're going to call that JSON method. And when that response happens, then we're going to take that JSON and we're going to log it to the console. Okay? So each one of these steps is waiting on a previous step to happen. Okay, they're asynchronous functions, meaning our computers can go on doing what they're doing, our browsers can go on doing what they're doing while we're waiting for these to happen. If anything goes wrong in here, the catch function will run. In this case, we're logging an error message to the console. So this little code isn't doing much other than logging a good response to the console or logging an error to the console, but it's kind of the same thing, and I think it's easy to read. Hey, go to this address, then when you get something, convert it to JSON, then when you get that JSON, log it to the console. If anything goes wrong, log an error message to the console. That's it. If you go back and compare that to the XML HTTP request object, it's nice, short, easy to read, and we can see what happens at every step of the way. And I prefer Fetch API. In an upcoming video, I'm going to show you yet another way that looks a little bit more like traditional code. And they say like new programmers might like it better, but honestly, to me, this one is easy. This looks easy. The way it's written, the way it's formatted makes our jobs easy. And I don't think the other one, I will show you an example coming up of code written both ways. They're both easy. To me, this is the easier of the two. In the next video, we're going to look at an application that gets the picture of the day for a website. It pulls it from NASA. Hey, NASA, give us the picture of the day. NASA has an API we can use. There are hundreds and thousands of APIs on the internet that we can access and use through JavaScript to put information on our web pages.